The first time she marched onto our lawn and shredded a paper right in front of me. I laughed because who rips someone's deed like it's a bad receipt? Then the laughter died in my throat when half the street started nodding, and she smiled like she'd just closed a sale. That's how Maple Ridge started to feel like a place designed to make you small. Small mistakes, small reputations, small defenses. We thought we were buying a home. Turns out we'd bought a Target. My name's Ethan Cole. My wife, Maya, teaches science at the middle school and has a knack for finding a loose thread and pulling the whole sweater apart until the truth shows. We'd moved into the house with the sagging porch because it had character, a corner lot with a maple out front and a porch that said, "Stay a while." For a month, it was exactly that. Barbecues, late-night pizza with friends, plans for a garden. Then Carolyn Pierce arrived like she'd been waiting in the bushes, always polished, always in control, the kind of woman who could make a room go quiet without raising her voice. The first blow was theatrical. Carolyn stepped out of her SUV, handed me a color-printed notice, and announced to anyone within earshot that we had 90 days to resolve community violations, or the board would begin enforcement. She tore a photocopy of our deed in half. "Just to be dramatic, we don't tolerate this sort of thing here," she said. Her words were soft. The meaning was hard. It was public shaming dressed in municipal language. People who'd waved at us 2 weeks earlier suddenly looked at the ground, or at her, like there was a right side and a wrong side to stand on. What I learned fast was this: power doesn't have to be legal to feel real. Carolyn had a rhythm: meetings, anonymous complaints, inspections that showed up with clipboards and badges that looked official enough. She spoke about property values, curb appeal, the duties of a good citizen, and she always used the word "we," like she represented the invisible majority. When neighbors asked, she'd name a developer or a bank, drop a name that sounded authoritative, and people would blink and agree. It was gaslighting dressed as community service. Maya didn't take that well. She's not a loud person, but she has a way of leaning into a problem until the foundation gives. She'd sit at our kitchen table at night, laptop open, reading tax rolls and meeting minutes, cross-checking signatures, and the deeper she dug, the stranger the pattern became. Notices that showed up on our door had tiny discrepancies, dates that didn't match county records, a seal that looked off if you squinted, a phone number that routed to a forwarding service. The more she checked, the more it looked like someone had been practicing the art of plausible paperwork for a long time. Escalation is what makes a small harassment feel like a war. First, it was petty. Our mailbox got flattened, a stack of flyers full of accusations left on the porch, a neighbor's dog suddenly barking at our kids. Then it got physical. The pool we'd finally managed to clear after moving in was full of a milky chemical at dawn one Saturday, the toys floating like plastic ghosts. That was the first time I felt close to rage. You don't mess with the places where your kids feel safe. You don't turn a backyard into a crime scene and call it a misunderstanding. We called the police more than once. Every time, the response was the same. "This looks civil, we can't do much." The paperwork Carolyn waved around gave her an air of untouchability. But she wasn't untouchable. She was sloppy in ways that mattered: a bank transfer that routed through an odd account, an old alias that popped up in court dockets in 2 other counties. Maya found a woman who'd been run off a different neighborhood by the same committee. Frank Hale, retired, grumpy in that honest way about cops who've seen too much, showed up at our door with a coffee thermos and a notebook. He'd been watching patterns like this for years. He'd lost a cousin's house once, and he hated that no one stopped to see the seams. We set a trap. Not a violent one, nothing stupid, but a sting of conversation and recorders, the kind that makes people comfortable enough to reveal themselves. Maya posed as a neighbor worried about curb appeal. I pretended to be a guy who might be swayed. Carolyn loved an audience, so her guard dropped. In a grocery store aisle, while she talked about memberships and keeping standards, she slipped. "It's easier if they feel isolated." That offhand line mattered. We had more than rhetoric now. We had audio. We had an old inspection badge that matched nothing in the registry. And we had an attorney, Lila Moreno, who smelled a paper trail and chased it like a bloodhound. The courtroom is not a movie. It is slow and legal and full of technicalities. But it's also where polished theatrics stumble. Lila took what Maya had found: invoices, bank traces, an audio file, and turned it into a narrative that the judge could follow. She showed how inspections were billed to shell entities, how complaints were seeded by accounts that traced back to one phone number, how the emergency meeting minutes had been typed after the fact. Witnesses we hadn't even known existed came forward. A landscaper who'd been paid in cash to remove hazards, a secretary who'd photocopied notices at Carolyn's insistence, neighbors who'd been coached on what to say. The more pieces we laid out, the clearer it became that this wasn't about grass height or mailbox standards, it was a racket built on fear. Carolyn didn't break on the stand like you might expect. She leaned on performance calm, offended, convinced of her righteousness. But certain things cracked glass. An account number that led to her daughter's business, a forgery expert who said a seal had been traced to a different county, a retired neighbor who testified that he'd been paid to complain. There was a moment when she looked at Maya, like all her theater had finally met a foe who wouldn't be bullied into silence. And for the first time in months, I saw fear cross her face. The verdict wasn't a fairy tale. We didn't get a life sentence for Carolyn. The law is a messy, compromise machine, but we got something better for the long view. Criminal charges for fraud, a civil injunction to keep her away from Maple Ridge, and a settlement that covered most of the repairs, and then some. The community created a fund to help other neighbors who'd been targeted. We fixed the pool, slowly, the way you stitch a wound that doesn't want to heal. But victory arrived with a rumble of complexity. Some neighbors who'd sided with Carolyn felt vindicated later and apologized. Some were gone, their trust shattered, gone to other towns that felt safer. What stayed with me longest, though, wasn't the legal paper or the money. It was how close we came to folding into ourselves, how easy it was to let a stranger decide what your home meant. For months afterward, I watched porches and saw not just wood and paint, but decisions waiting to be made. Do you speak up or shrink away? Do you invite someone in or lock your door? We chose to fight because silence seemed worse than exposure. We chose to file and testify and publish and stand in the yard, and that choice made a difference. Maya went back to teaching, but she also started a small newsletter, a plain list of red flags for anyone moving into a community with a strong HOA. Frank started a neighborhood watch that was less about suspicion and more about looking out for each other, and Lila began offering pro bono clinics on property rights. Maple Ridge changed, some of it for the better, some of it with the scars still visible. Carolyn moved on, some predators do, but the map of her movements was now public, and other communities started paying attention earlier. If there's a moral here, it's not tidy. Power can be performed, and people can be coached into believing lies if the lie sounds official. But systems are made of people, and people can be remade too. If you live in a place where we starts to sound like it means them, ask questions. Keep records. Talk to your neighbors before you need to know who'll stand with you. And if you find yourself in the middle of something that smells wrong, find a quiet person who reads the fine print. They're often the ones who become loud enough to break the story. I'll leave you with one image I keep. The maple tree in our yard, 2 summers later, full and heavy and shading a porch where people still sit. The house looks the same from a block away, paint, step, mailbox, but the people on that porch have changed. They know the names of their neighbors now. They know how to check a seal and what a shell company looks like on a bank trace. They also know that a community that talks to itself can't be bought by a single loud voice. So tell me, what would you have done in our place? Was Carolyn a villain carved from greed, or a symptom of a system we let go soft for too long? Drop a comment, share your story, and if this hit close, share the video, because the more people who know, the less room there is for someone to turn a neighborhood into a business built on fear.